Thomas Bennett stood alone on his quiet ranch in the English countryside. The morning air was cold and sharp against his weathered face, at 52 years old. He felt like his life was completely finished. Every day felt the same now. Empty, meaningless, without hope. 3 years had passed since his beloved wife Margaret died from a long illness. Thomas still remembered holding her hand in the hospital as she took her last breath. She had been his everything, his best friend, his reason for waking up each morning. When she died, a big part of Thomas died with her. Then, just when Thomas thought things couldn't get worse, they did. His only son, William, was killed while serving his country overseas. The young man had been so full of life and dreams. William wanted to come home and help run the family ranch. He wanted to get married and give Thomas grandchildren. All those dreams were buried with William in a military cemetery far from home. Now Thomas lived alone in a house that once echoed with laughter and love. The walls seemed to whisper memories of better times. Margaret's favorite teacup still sat in the kitchen cupboard. William's childhood drawings were still stuck to the refrigerator with old magnets. But these reminders only made Thomas feel more alone. The ranch was falling apart too. Thomas had stopped taking proper care of his animals. His few remaining cows wandered round thin and neglected. The fences needed repair. Weeds grew everywhere. Bills piled up on his kitchen table, unopened and ignored. The bank had sent several letters threatening to take his farm away. Thomas didn't care anymore. What was the point of fighting for a place that held so much pain? Thomas barely ate these days. Food had no taste. He had lost so much weight that his clothes hung loose on his thin frame. Most days he just sat in his old armchair, staring at photographs of happier times. His neighbors, kind people who had known his family for years, tried to help him. They brought food. They offered to help with farm work. They invited him to church and community gatherings. But Thomas pushed everyone away. He was rude when people tried to visit. He ignored phone calls. He told himself that he didn't deserve happiness or friendship. The guilt ate at him every day. Why was he still alive when Margaret and William were gone? Why hadn't he been able to save them? These dark thoughts filled his mind from morning until night, on this particular cold winter morning. Thomas made the worst decision of his life. He walked slowly to the old apple tree at the back of his property. This tree held special meaning for him and Margaret. They used to spread a blanket under its shade in summer. They would eat lunch there and talk about their dreams for the future. Margaret loved to pick apples from this tree and make pies that filled the house with sweet smells. Now the tree stood bare and cold in the winter wind. Thomas looked up at its empty branches and felt just as empty inside. With a heavy heart and hands that shook from cold and sadness, he began to dig. Each scoop of frozen dirt felt like another step toward ending his pain forever. He worked slowly, tears streaming down his cheeks and freezing before they could fall to the ground. Thomas believed that no one would miss him when he was gone. His neighbors would probably be relieved not to worry about the sad old man who lived alone. The bank would take his property and sell it to someone who could make it productive again. Maybe that would be better for everyone. As Thomas dug deeper, his mind filled with memories. He remembered the day he married Margaret in the little church in town. He remembered bringing baby William home from the hospital. He remembered teaching his son to ride a horse and milk cows. These memories should have brought him comfort. But instead, they made him feel more hopeless. All the good things in his life were gone forever. But just as Thomas was about to give up completely on everything, something unexpected happened. He heard a weak sound coming from the direction of his front gate. At first he thought it might be the wind, but then he heard it again. It sounded like someone calling for help. Thomas stopped digging and listened carefully. There it was again, a woman's voice, weak and desperate. Thomas dropped his shovel and hurried toward the sound, his heart beating fast. He hadn't heard another human voice at his property in months. When Thomas reached his front gate, he couldn't believe what he saw. There, collapsed against the cold metal bars, was a young woman. She looked very young, maybe still a teenager. She was clearly expecting a baby very soon. Her clothes were thin and dirty. She looked like she had been walking for a long time in the cold weather. Her face was pale and she was shivering terribly. The young woman looked up at Thomas with frightened eyes. "Please," she whispered in a voice so quiet he could barely hear her. "Please help me." Then her eyes closed and she fainted right there in the snow. Thomas stood frozen for a moment. He had a choice to make. He could turn away and return to his dark thoughts and his terrible plan. Or he could help this stranger who clearly needed him desperately. Something deep inside Thomas, something he thought was completely gone forever, suddenly stirred to life. Without thinking about it anymore, he gently scooped up the young woman and carried her into his warm house. When the young woman woke up, she found herself lying in a soft bed in a room she had never seen before. The walls were painted a gentle yellow color, and clean white curtains hung at the window. Sunlight streamed through the glass, making everything look warm and peaceful. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was or how she had gotten there. Then the memories came flooding back. The cold snow, the long walk, the desperate knock at the gate, the kind man who had carried her inside. When she fainted, the young woman sat up slowly, her hand resting on her large belly. Her baby was still safe inside her, moving gently as if to remind her that everything was okay. The door opened quietly, and the man from yesterday came in carrying a tray. He had gray hair and tired eyes, but his face looked gentle. He was tall and thin, wearing old farm clothes that had seen many years of hard work. When he saw that she was awake, he smiled just a little. "I'm glad you're feeling better," he said in a quiet voice. "My name is Thomas Bennett. This is my home. You're safe here." The young woman felt tears come to her eyes. She had been so scared for so long that she had almost forgotten what safety felt like. "My name is Emily Watson," she said softly. "I'm 19 years old. I'm so sorry for bothering you. I can leave if you want me to." Thomas set the tray down on a small table next to the bed. There was hot soup, fresh bread, and a cup of tea that smelled like flowers. "You're not bothering anyone, Emily," he said gently. "You need help, and it's the right thing to do. A person doesn't turn away someone who needs help." Emily looked at this kind stranger and felt something break open inside her heart. She started crying, not from sadness, but from relief. No one had been kind to her in such a long time. Her own family had turned their backs on her when she needed them most. She had been living on the streets for weeks, sleeping wherever she could find shelter, eating whatever food she could find or afford with the few coins people sometimes gave her. "Thank you," Emily whispered through her tears. "I don't know why you're being so kind to me, but thank you." Thomas sat down in a chair near the bed. He looked at Emily and saw something that made his heart ache in a different way than it had. In years, she reminded him of his son William's wife, who had died in the same car accident that took William away. Emily had the same gentle eyes and the same brave way of trying to smile even when she was scared. "Just eat your soup and rest," Thomas said. "We can talk when you're feeling stronger." Emily ate slowly, savoring every bite. The soup was warm and filling, made with vegetables and tender pieces of chicken. The bread was fresh and soft. The tea tasted like chamois meal and honey. It was the best meal she had eaten in months. As she ate, Thomas sat quietly in his chair, not asking questions or demanding explanations. He just let her be comfortable over the next few days. Emily began to feel safe enough to tell Thomas about her life. She had grown up in a home where no one really wanted her. Her parents fought constantly and blamed her for their problems. When she got pregnant, they threw her out of the house and told her never to come back. The baby's father was a young man who disappeared as soon as he learned about the pregnancy. I had nowhere to go, Emily explained to Thomas one evening as they sat by the warm fireplace. I tried staying with friends, but their parents didn't want me there. I tried finding work. But no one wants to hire someone who's pregnant. I've been walking from town to town, hoping to find someone who might help me. Thomas listened to her story and felt his heart breaking for this brave young woman. I'm sorry you've had to go through all that, he said. No one should have to face such difficulties alone, especially someone carrying a baby. As the days passed, Thomas found himself caring about Emily in a way he hadn't cared about anyone in years. He made sure she ate healthy food 3 times a day. He gave her warm clothes that had belonged to William's wife. He drove her to see a doctor in the nearby town to make sure she and the baby were healthy. The doctor said Emily was doing well but needed rest and good nutrition. "Why are you helping me?" Emily asked Thomas one evening as they sat together after dinner. "You don't even know me. I could be a terrible person for all you know." Thomas thought for a moment before answering. He looked at Emily's honest face and saw only goodness there, because everyone deserves kindness. He said finally, "And maybe because helping you helps me remember who I used to be. I had forgotten what it felt like to care about someone else." Emily smiled, and for the first time in months, Thomas found himself smiling back. The house that had felt so empty and lonely for 3 years was starting to feel like a home again. There were voices in the rooms. There was laughter at meal times. There was hope growing where only sadness had lived before. 3 weeks passed quietly at Thomas's ranch. Emily was feeling much better now. Her cheeks had color again, and she smiled more often. Thomas enjoyed having someone to talk to during meals. The house felt warmer with Emily there. She helped with small tasks around the kitchen and always thanked Thomas for everything he did for her. Then one night, everything changed very quickly. Emily woke up Thomas in the middle of the night. She was holding her belly and breathing hard. "Thomas," she said in a worried voice, "I think the baby is coming." Thomas looked outside and saw that a terrible snowstorm had started. The wind was howling, and snow was falling so hard that he could barely see past the windows. The roads would be impossible to drive on. The nearest hospital was 30 minutes away on a good day. Tonight, it might as well have been on the other side of the world. "We need to get you to the hospital," Thomas said, trying to stay calm even though his heart was beating fast. Emily shook her head as another pain hit her. "I don't think there's time," she said through gritted teeth. "The baby is coming now." Thomas felt panic rise in his chest. He had never delivered a baby before. What if something went wrong? What if he made a mistake? But then he looked at Emily's frightened face and knew he had to be strong for her. She was counting on him, and he would not let her down. "Okay," Thomas said, taking a deep breath. "We can do this together. You're a strong woman. Emily, I've seen how brave you are." Thomas helped Emily get comfortable in her bed. He gathered clean towels and warm water, remembering things he had seen in movies and television shows. He washed his hands carefully and tried to remember everything he knew about babies being born. Moss. Tea of all, he tried to stay calm and encouraging. "For Emily's sake, you can do this, Emily," Thomas said, holding her hand tightly. "I'm right here with you. I'm not going anywhere. Emily squeezed his hand so hard it hurt. But Thomas didn't mind. He could see she was scared, but she was also determined. I can't do this, Emily said during a particularly hard moment. It hurts too much. Yes, you can, Thomas said firmly. You're the strongest person I know. Think about your baby. Think about holding your little one in your arms. You can do this for several hours. Thomas stayed by Emily's side. He brought her water when she was thirsty. He wiped her forehead with cool cloths. He held her hand through every difficult moment. Even though he was scared, he kept his voice calm and steady. Emily needed him to be strong, so he was strong. Finally, just as the sun was starting to rise, baby Rose was born. She came into the world crying loudly, which Thomas knew was a good sign. The tiny baby was perfect and healthy. She had a full head of dark hair and tiny fingers that moved like she was trying to grab onto the world. When Thomas held the baby for the first time, something amazing happened inside his heart. Tears streamed down his weathered face, but these were not tears of sadness like he had cried for so many months. These were tears of pure joy. This wasn't his granddaughter by blood, but she felt like family. She felt like hope. She's beautiful, Emily, Thomas whispered, carefully placing the baby in her mother's arms. You did such a good job. You should be proud of yourself. Emily was exhausted but happier than Thomas had ever seen her. Her face was glowing with love as she looked at her daughter. Thank you, Thomas, she whispered. I couldn't have done this without you. You saved both of us. In the weeks that followed Thomas's delivery of baby Rose, the old ranch house came alive in ways Thomas had forgotten were possible. There were tiny baby clothes hanging on the clothesline, fluttering in the breeze like colorful flags of joy. Emily would sit in the rocking chair by the window, humming soft lullabies while feeding Rose. Thomas found himself humming along while he cooked meals for all three of them. The house was full of new sounds now. Baby Rose would coo and gurgle. During the day, Emily would sing to her or talk to her in the gentle voice that mothers use with their babies. Thomas would find himself smiling at these sounds as he worked round the property. Thomas began teaching Emily how to care for the few animals he had left on the ranch. She was a quick learner and genuinely enjoyed the work. Emily loved feeding the chickens and collecting eggs. She helped Thomas repair fences and learned how to milk the old cow that still lived in the barn. I love it here, Emily told Thomas one morning as they worked together in the garden. Baby Rose was sleeping peacefully in a basket nearby. This feels like the home I never had growing up. But their peaceful new life was suddenly threatened when an official car pulled up to the house one afternoon. A woman in a business suit got out and knocked on the door. She introduced herself as Mrs. Collins from Social Services. A neighbor had reported seeing a young mother living with an older man, and they had questions about the situation. Thomas's heart sank as he realized that Emily and Rose might be taken away from him, just when he had finally found a reason to live again. When Mrs. Jennifer Collins knocked on Thomas's door that afternoon, his heart immediately filled with worry. The woman was dressed in a professional grey suit and carried a briefcase. She had short brown hair and wore glasses that made her look very serious. Thomas had seen people like her before when his son William was young, and he knew they had the power to change families forever. Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Collins said politely. I'm from the County Social Services Department. We received a report about a young mother and baby living here. I need to speak with you about the situation. Thomas felt his hands shake as he invited Mrs. Collins inside. Emily was in the kitchen feeding baby Rose, and she looked up with frightened eyes when she saw the official visitor. Thomas could see that Emily was remembering all the times adults had failed her in the past. Mrs. Collins was kind but very thorough. In her questions, she had a job to do, and she took it seriously. She wanted to make sure that baby Rose was safe and that Emily was not being hurt or taken advantage of in any way. These were important questions, and Thomas understood why she had to ask them. "I'd like to speak with each of you separately," Mrs. Collins explained. "This helps me get a clearer picture of the situation. Mr. Bennet, could we start with you?" Thomas sat across from Mrs. Collins at his kitchen table while Emily took baby Rose upstairs. His heart was beating fast, but he tried to answer every question honestly. Mrs. Collins asked about how Emily came to live with him. She asked about his financial situation. She asked about his past and why he was helping a young woman he barely knew. "I won't lie to you," Thomas said, looking directly into Mrs. Collins's eyes. "I was in a very dark place when Emily arrived. At my gate, I had lost my wife and son, and I had given up on life completely. But caring for Emily and Rose has given me purpose again. They're not my blood family, but they're my family now in every way that matters." Mrs. Collins wrote notes in her folder as Thomas spoke. She asked about his plans for the future and how he intended to support Emily and the baby. Thomas explained that he was working to save his ranch and that Emily was a big help with the daily tasks. After Thomas finished answering questions, Mrs. Collins asked to speak with Emily alone. Emily came downstairs carrying baby Rose, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms. Thomas went outside to give them privacy, but his heart was heavy with worry about what might happen. Emily sat down carefully, holding her baby close to her chest. She was nervous, but she was determined to tell the truth about everything. Mrs. Collins could see that Emily was very young, but she also noticed that the girl seemed healthy and confident. "Emily," Mrs. Collins said gently, "I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you here because you want to be? Is anyone forcing you to stay? Are you and your baby safe?" Emily looked down at baby Rose and then back at Mrs. Collins. "Thomas saved my life," she said, with emotion in her voice. "I was homeless and scared and alone. I had nowhere to go and no one who cared about me. When I collapsed at his gate, he could have turned me away. Instead, he took me in and treated me like family." Emily told Mrs. Collins about her difficult childhood and how her own parents had rejected her when she became pregnant. She explained how Thomas had cared for her during her pregnancy and helped deliver baby Rose during the snowstorm. "He's been like a father to me," Emily continued. "The father I never had growing up. Rose and I are safe here. We're happy here. This is our home, and Thomas is our family." Mrs. Collins spent the next week investigating Thomas and Emily's situation. She spoke with neighbors who had known Thomas for many years. Every person she talked to said the same thing. Thomas Bennet was a good man who had gone through terrible sadness, but had always been honest and kind. The local doctor, Dr. Williams, told Mrs. Collins that Emily and baby Rose were both healthy and well cared for. "I've seen Emily and the baby several times," Dr. Williams said. "Thomas brings them for regular checkups. That baby is thriving, and Emily looks happier and healthier than when I first met her." Even Pastor Johnson from the village church wrote a letter supporting Thomas and Emily. "Thomas has been a member of our community for over 20 years, the pastor wrote. "He's a man of good character who has faced great loss with dignity. The whole community has watched him come back to life since Emily and the baby arrived." Mrs. Collins also discovered that Emily was working hard to finish her education through correspondence courses. Thomas had helped her enroll in a program to complete her high school diploma. Emily was studying every day and getting excellent grades. After several visits and many conversations, Mrs. Collins made her final decision. She sat down with Thomas and Emily in their living room, while baby Rose played on a blanket on the floor. "It's clear that this is a loving home," Mrs. Collins said with a smile. "Emily, you're doing well in your studies and you're an excellent mother. Thomas, you're providing excellent care and support. I see no reason to disrupt this family. You have my department's full support." Thomas felt tears of relief fill his eyes. Emily started crying too, but these were happy tears. That night, they celebrated with a simple dinner of roast chicken and vegetables, grateful hearts, and the knowledge that they would stay together as a family. 2 years had passed since that snowy night when Emily and baby Rose came into Thomas's life. The old ranch looked completely different now. The fences were painted white and stood straight and strong. The barn had a new red roof that gleamed in the sunlight. Green grass grew where weeds used to cover the ground. Flowers bloomed in neat rows near the front porch, adding bright colors to the peaceful scene. Thomas had worked hard to save his ranch from the bank. With Emily's help, he had started raising chickens and selling fresh eggs to people in town. They also grew vegetables in a large garden behind the house. Emily was excellent at growing tomatoes, carrots, and beans. The local grocery store now bought their fresh produce every week. But the most important change was something Thomas never expected. Word had spread through the county about how Thomas and Emily had helped each other. Other young women who were in trouble began coming to the ranch asking for help. Thomas and Emily started a small program to help young mothers who had nowhere else to go. "We can't save everyone," Thomas told Emily one morning as they worked in the garden together, "but we can help a few people at a time." They had built a small guest house behind the main house where women could stay for a few months while they got back on their feet. Emily taught them how to care for babies and how to grow food. Thomas helped them find jobs in town or learn new skills. Some women moved on to start new lives elsewhere. Others stayed in the area and became part of the community. Emily had finished her high school education through correspondence courses just as she had promised Mrs. Collins. She had worked hard, studying every night after baby Rose went to sleep. Thomas was so proud when Emily received her diploma in the mail. They celebrated by having a special dinner with cake and ice cream. Now Emily was studying to become a nurse. She took classes at the community college in the nearby town 3 days a week. Thomas watched Rose while Emily was in school. On the other days, Emily studied at home while helping with the ranch work. She was an excellent student and loved learning about how to help people who were sick or hurt. "I want to be a nurse because I know what it feels like when someone helps you when you need it most," Emily explained to Thomas. "You showed me how much difference one person can make in someone's life." Little Rose was now 2 years old and filled every day with joy and laughter. She had curly brown hair that bounced when she ran, and bright green eyes that sparkled with curiosity about everything around her. Rose called Thomas Grandpa, and the sound of her sweet voice saying that word made his heart feel warm every single day. Rose loved living on the ranch. She followed Thomas everywhere he went, asking endless questions about the animals and plants. Her favorite activity was feeding the chickens every morning. She would scatter corn on the ground while the chickens clucked and flapped round her feet. Rose would giggle with delight at their funny behavior. In the evenings, Thomas would put Rose on his shoulders and walk round the farm. She would point at everything she saw and tell him stories in the special language that only 2-year-old children understand. Thomas loved these walks more than anything else in his day. The old apple tree where Thomas had once dug what he thought would be his grave was now surrounded by the most beautiful garden on the ranch. Emily had planted flowers there in memory of Margaret and William. There were roses, daisies, sunflowers, and many other colorful blooms. A small wooden bench sat under the tree where Thomas could sit and think about his first family. while watching his new family play in the yard. They would be so proud of the man you've become again. Emily often told Thomas when she found him, sitting on that bench, Margaret and William would love Rose so much. They would be happy that you found love again. Thomas had finally found peace with his past. He still missed his wife and son every single day, but the sadness no longer felt like it would crush him. He had learned that honoring their memory meant living a life full of love and purpose, not hiding from the world in guilt and loneliness on Rose's second birthday. The house was full of friends from town. Children played games in the yard while adults shared food and stories on the front porch. Thomas had made Rose a wooden rocking horse, and she spent most of the party riding it back and forth across the living room floor. Emily had baked a chocolate cake with pink frosting and 2 candles on top. When it was time to sing happy birthday, everyone gathered round the kitchen table. Rose clapped her hands and tried to sing along, even though she didn't know all the words yet. Make a wish. Sweetheart, Emily told Rose as she helped her. Lean toward the candles. Rose took a big breath and blew out both candles at once. Everyone cheered and clapped. Thomas felt tears of happiness fill his eyes as he watched this perfect moment. Later that evening, after all the guests had gone home and Rose was asleep in her bed, Thomas and Emily sat on the front porch watching the sunset over their peaceful ranch. "Thank you," Emily said quietly, taking Thomas's weathered hand in hers. "Thank you," Thomas replied. "You both saved me." The end.